Well, hello, Richard.
Hi, how you doing? It's such a strange thing, isn't it? It's just getting used to Zooming. I didn't even. I'm sure nobody knew what Zoom was like 4 weeks ago. It's,
No, apart
but
from teenagers or something, someone
yeah,
knew. Yeah.
yeah, it's probably it probably did. Yeah, it's probably like TikTok or something that you have to be 12 to know about.
But it's all, thoroughly disembodied, and yet some people are flocking to Zoom parties and
Yeah, yeah,
taking
yeah,
to it, and they will stick with it as well. I'm sure there's going to be,
yeah.
people grooving in all sorts of peculiar ways
Yeah,
online
yeah.
in the future.
The Hacienda one like crashed massively, didn't it? It has so many people trying to get on it. And there was one last night with some American bloke called Travis something that I don't know.
Scott
But
he
14
was
million
in that
people.
hellscape that is Fortnite, wasn't he?
Yeah, 14 million people, and mega amount of people buying merch and stuff off it. So that's basically like doing an enormous world tour, basically in one night.
This is
So,
like what I mean. We'll get on to looking back at subcultural moments later in the conversation, I think. But it just suddenly I thought this is like what the Shaman were talking about in 1990 instead. Colin and Angus and Mr.
yeah.
C were like sitting there off their tits going, in the future people are going to go clubbing on the internet.
It's a shame. It's also Future Sound of London as well. I think who probably did go clubbing on the internet at the time, didn't they? With that ISDN thing, which is naming your album after a telephone line.
I saw that at Stanmer Park Festival. They broadcast their entire set from their studio, yes, down to Sussex.
Fantastic.
Yeah, now we're living in their future.
Yeah, we are. We're in their world, in Gaz's world.
I don't know if any of them mention plagues, but there it is.
I think Mr. C is pretty much doing the same thing. He's doing guided meditation on Facebook, which I kind of tapped into it, and I thought it was stuck because he was just sitting there like this. So, I think he said like a guided thing, and then sat there again. It was quite, it's interesting. It's like, I think if you went with it, it would have been good, but it was quite slow TV.
He's a beautiful online presence because he's half Dalai Lama, half Danny Dyer.
Yes, indeed. Yes, we were probably talking about Cling Street, I think, and that early club of yore that didn't get the acid house birthing myth that Shum got, but Cling Street was a fantastic scuzzy place. It really was. It was. It looked like that Prodigy video where they kind of smashed through the wall, and it was kind of. I think it was kind of one light bulb and a just dripping ceiling and just horrendously kind of archaic, but the most fun I think out of all of the acid. So I've slipped straight into Acid House legend speaking. It's terrible about this.
Well, let's do it. I mean, we'd initially planned to talk about the things that the various activities that we've been doing separately and together recently, and then kind of circle back to the influences on them. But why don't we start with the influences then?
Well, it's just, I was listening to your talk with Jeremy Deller, which I found fascinating, and I really liked his. I mean, obviously we all like that Everybody in the Place documentary, just because it was, coming from Acid House for someone that was a bit younger and wasn't there at the beginning, so you didn't get that whole, oh yeah, we started it first kind of thing. It was such a different thing, and then playing the film to a youth group at school, and I think there's a reevaluation that can now start because it's 30 years. I think that any documentaries about that period at the time were really skewed, and I think that his was a very interesting start of documenting it differently, and also looking at the different stories, because there's so many more stories that haven't been told.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been looking at 30 years stuff, 30 years since 1990 now. Right. I was looking back at that short film about chilling, Do you remember that
Right.
one? All of
Yeah,
the
indeed.
Balearic guys. So I think Terry Farley and Rocky and Diesel and The Farm are in it. I was speaking today to John from The Beloved, and he said he refused to be in it. He was there in Ibiza at the time playing the same gig that they were all out for, but because he was on Top of the Pops, he was a bit worried that the tabloids would come for him. Whereas obviously Peter Hutton, being a bit more of a scally, wasn't bothered. But that film, you're right, because it was skewed, because it was a people right in the thick of it film, and I think only people kind of keyed into that would have kind of got the emotion of it at the time. But now, as a historical document, I think anyone could look at it and see the kind of the innocence and experience, the sort of magic in the air.
There's a great sort of, I think, 5-minute short by Wiz, who did Weekender and various other things, which is just people just in front of some kind of
a moon
backdrop. Yeah, that's right. At the boys' own party, and I remember that party very well. I remember him being there and talking to him all about it, and people getting in front, and then just forgot about it, and then just saw it recently. And it's just, everyone looks really naughty, and it's really kind of cheeky, but it's still it is quite innocent. But it's like all of it is, but as well. It's an interesting. It is all those snapshots, and I think that's what's interesting about the talks we've been having and the things you've been writing about club culture. That there's something about those nights and that thing at the time, and you just think they're fleeting, and it's just very mercurial, and it's all smoke and mirrors, and it's all just this haze, and you kind of can't look back and really think about them, and they don't feel that tangible. But I think what you've been doing in your book, and also in Emma Warren's book as well, is just really saying, well, no, these are actually really important things. They are tangible, but in a different way. How would you describe those kind of nights and those kind of cultures in a tangible way that we can look at nowadays?
Oh God, yes. I mean, it's not accidental with what I've been doing, and actually coming in contact with Emma's book that you mentioned, Make Some Space, just as I was finishing up and getting Base Mids Tops out and published, was just, it completely threw everything I'd done into relief, because she'd done this kind of story of a set of connections all focused on one building. And you start to learn about the layerings of, it was a Jamaican cultural centre and studio, and a ballet studio or something, and then, and it turned into this jazz venue, and it's all the stories of the different generations of people around this one building. And obviously I had tried to show the same kind of sets of cultural layerings and interweavings in Britain, but through this much more sprawling set of interviews. So it's like these long interviews with people across decades in Bristol and Nottingham and Northampton and Manchester and obviously London. But so I mean, so many things since the publication of the book have just made me go, that's why that needs to be done, and that's why that happened. And even feedback from the people interviewed in it who've come back and said, now I understand where I fit. Right. Which is kind of a daunting one for me. It's like, well, it's not my place, but at the same time, the idea was to contextualize different generations and different scenes and sounds within a longer stream.
This is the book we're talking about, everyone. You can buy it in all good shops.
And it's not by accident, because I have, for the longest time, I write normal review stuff. It's my bread and butter work. And in order to stay interested in it, I always try and find something a little bit beneath the surface to kind of add a bit of meat to the soup, as it were. When I'm saying, here's a funky record you might want to dance to for the 50th time that month. And I ended up doing a creative writing master's, so 15 years ago now. And I just I tried to write some stories about my experience in subcultures. I was like, this is really difficult because there's casts of hundreds of people in it, and there's experiences that take not just 6 hours, but 36 hours or 72 hours. You know, you can have a conversation that lasts the length of a weekend. And that conversation might kind of carry, it literally would. If you're in full raving mode, you'd be with the same people for 72 hours or longer.
So when you were coming to write it, did you kind of have a rough overview or skeleton or way that you wanted to go, or did the interviews really inform where you were going with it?
It was. It started too vague. So Brian, the photographer, and I started a website together, and we had this kind of very general idea of documenting underground culture, and we like connectors. We like people who are neither one thing nor another, or rather are more than one thing. And so we talked to, I can't remember who we interviewed for it now, Mary Ann Hobbs and Christian Vogel, who's an old friend of mine who's, you know, covers everything from serious boshing techno right through to art music. Couple of the people who ended up in the book were on that website as well. So Zed Bias and Tony Thorpe. But it was all too general, and it just didn't give us something to hold on to. And then I saw Brian's sound system photos, and suddenly the idea is sound system culture, okay, bass culture. And just thinking about his pictures of the wires behind the sound systems, and they gave me a little metaphor for the connections that join these different scenes. And it was those photos that gave this like really nice, the temple of the bass bin. So really focused on stuff that was bass heavy and Caribbean influenced. It was the Caribbean sound system culture, and suddenly all of the rest of jungle and grime and garage and broken beat and all of these different sounds just fell into place as part of that. And yeah, then it was a matter of having people we knew we wanted in it. So Zed Bias and Tony again, and people like Terror Danger, and then chasing people on a wish list, or just suddenly spotting a gap and going, right, well, we need to cover those years, and we haven't got someone from Manchester yet, or we haven't got someone from Sheffield yet, or whatever. And just, you know, it could have been 25 different people and worked in the same way, but yeah, it was slow piecing together. And then it took on a life of its own. It became the thing it is. And like I said at the Journey to Newtopia event that we did the other weekend, since doing it, it's become even more concrete. It's almost like I had a vision of the wires themselves. Kind of.
You had that great sort of idea that was the connections and the art and the space and that physicality of the boxes with their very worn things that you see in all the pictures. You know, this kind of that became a big metaphor for you, didn't it?
Well, no, it became. I mean, it was the metaphor as we were writing, and then as afterwards, and it was kind of prompted by the passing of Andrew Weatherall and all the conversations that were happening around him. And obviously, you know, he was a gentleman of a mystic bent, and not quite a cosmic cat, as he would put it, but definitely, you know, he was into his.
Yes, I was going to say, it started off every show with mentioning Gnostics, which is fairly obscure.
Well, exactly, Gnostic Sonics, and you know, he was a big fan of the ritual and the repetition, and just thinking about his take on it all suddenly made me think, well, actually, a ritual is a strengthening of something by repetition. It's almost like planting something solid in a four-dimensional space. So the temple of the decks and the speakers becomes like a beacon, and it's repeated in space and time. And then you think, well, actually, yes, it's a four-dimensional machine. A four-dimensional has been built with wires running through space and time.
Yeah, and with the kind of, there's links that go through both yours and Emma's books about space. I mean, about, you know, that which made me really start thinking about clubbing as a safe space as well. But you know, that there's, you know, throughout the decades there's been, there was, the clubs in Paris, jazz clubs for Jewish people during the Nazi occupation. There was obviously even through all different, obviously all gay culture clubs. You know, there's always been this space where you can do certain things. You can experiment, you can connect, you can be creative, you can do all these things. And you know, it does feel like a safe space. So it's interesting. The kind of psychogeography of it is really interesting to me as well. I mean, it's, you know, you mentioned that quote about dancing, writing about music is like dancing to architecture, and you're saying, well, the dancing and architecture is actually very connected.
Yes, of course.
So sorry, I was going to give you a quick question, but yeah, the space was interesting. You know, in space, the time and space thing is and it is something that can, you know, we can capture it a bit and use it in art and literature, I think.
Well, I hadn't actually thought as I was saying that just now, but you know, you have a time and space machine yourself.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. But I think, yeah, that is, it's good. It's kind of, but I do think that, you know, I've been starting to work on a film project about Acid House, and it is, I think it is different. And I think the Jeremy Deller thing was one of the first real key things, that where you can look at the story in a different way. And there's definitely within the UK dance sector, there's very much that idea of the birthing myth of Acid House being the four Balearic men of the apocalypse going to Ibiza and then bringing back this thing is now it's kind of like, it's almost that's you know, almost taboo to do that. I think, in fact, Emma sort of almost apologised for writing a piece in the Guardian that mentioned these people, and I think it's odd. I think it's sort of, I think that story was valid because those people were the ones nearest the PR, and it's in the same way that, you know, Tony Wilson's Hacienda myth is valid because he was a very, very big figurehead. But I mean, you know, and it helped Manchester a lot, but it wasn't the only thing going on in Manchester. You know, it really wasn't. It was, you know, it's. I think there should be a real reappraisal of Heaven as a nightclub of being equally as important as the Hacienda, but they didn't have a Tony Wilson, so it was, you know, it's I think those kind of weird myths and the way they've been repeated, I think, are just part of it, really. But I think there's so many other stories to be told. You know, I mean, Tony Colston Hayter's story, for example. I mean, that's a
strange and fascinating man.
I mean, I remember there was, I think on the front cover of the Sunday Times, it was him in sort of different outfits because he was a professional gambler and got banned from all these clubs. But this was like a few years before he was this kind of rave king doing these massive parties, making a load of money off phone lines, and basically a yuppie in Shum who'd seen the light and realised how to monetize it. And it's such a kind of weird sort of kind of criminal, sort of not quite gangster, but quite an odd take on that whole scene. And I think, yeah, there's so many other stories that can be told. And even with anyone, you know, anyone's community, you know, your gang, you know, there's always one amazing or millions of amazing stories, you know. And it's almost the kind of David Keenan This Is Memorial device plot where he, you know, made up a kind of Airdrie music scene and saying, you know, it was really hard to be Iggy Pop in Airdrie in the 70s, and I think that, you know, but it came out with these beautiful, resonant and romantic stories about these bands, and it just, anyone who'd been in an indie band or a little band when you're 14 playing guitar, it just completely you know, chimed with so much resonance, and it's yeah, I think it's good that we can now look at, you know, start looking at all of the stories and all of the other stories, and not really think of one of them as being more important than the other. You know, there's you know, clubs that came out in your book, like Rage, could be seen as just as influential as Shum, really, because of what happened afterwards. You know, in terms of drum and bass, and there's a lot of. I think it's interesting that there's still, years and years later, or through these kind of weird myths of culture, that there's still more stories to be had, and there's still more kind of critical approaches that can be had that show that the actual original birthing myths were just that. They were just myths, really.
I think one of the things in writing the book was actually to swerve around the already told stories, so that the acid house explosion, and I think it's possible to have too much of a backlash, because you see people going, oh, Shoom didn't mean anything, blah blah blah, which obviously it was a match and petrol at exactly the right moment, and so much exploded out of Shoom and Spectrum and Future and that small group of people. But it was really nice to have the stories of the people around that who were there at the time, but whose interests were maybe slightly elsewhere. Someone like Jumping Jack Frost or whatever, who actually he cited Clink Street as the true acid house party. That was where he was. He was converted to what all his colleagues on the reggae radio station he was playing on at the time called devil music, of course. But then a year later, it's the two are coming together, and hardcore and jungle are being born. Yes, 100%. One of the things that doing all these interviews for the book really made me realise is how much the pieces were in place in Britain in the mid-80s. From, I'd already sort of had half a clue about the influence of maybe Psychic TV, for example, and people that you worked with, that kind of psychedelic industrial Chris and Cozy kind of world on acclimatizing people to that type of music. But I had no clue really about how important the rare groove scene was, for example, in the whole warehouse party scene, which incorporated everyone from Norman Jade to Cold Cut to and obviously Soul to Soul. Soul to Soul were as much responsible for Jungle and Garage as any part of the Acid House crew were, for example.
Yeah, and those parties, the Soul to Soul parties were starting before Acid House, definitely. They were certainly going for a while. I think that the Rare Groove was very strange, though, because it's very local. And it wasn't, it was sort of the things that were happening, in similar things in terms of, like, you'd have to ask, like, Kermit and the Ruthless Rap Assassins and people like that about what because a big kind of jazz dance thing going up in Manchester, which was sort of kind of similar in a way, but
also street soul. Mark Ray holds forth endlessly about Manchester street soul, and how that was bigger than the Hacienda at the time, but obviously was documented. But the other thing that really stood out as a precursor was goth, and I honestly, not quite goth, but like the continuation of post-punk, I guess, through the mid-80s. So, talking to Youth for the book, obviously he was in Brilliant, but he talked about the Batcave as a place you would hear electronic records, a full-on goth club. But this is where not only Skinny Puppy, but and Sisters of Mercy records with drum machines, but actual full-on Detroit and Chicago records would get heard, and people like Luke Slater and GTO Greater Than One became vital parts of the rave movement, were completely from that background. Colin Favor, these were all precursors.
Colin and Eddie Richards were certainly really key. They playing at the Camden Palace, they had a big residency there, and the first time I went to Shim was because a mate was playing at Camden Palace with Colin Favor, and he was like the main DJ, and Danny Rampling was the second DJ. That was, I think, it's probably the first or second Shim, but their whole thing was Cabaret Voltaire and Tackhead, and or any kind of bizarre kind of noise sounding remix from that period. And so there was definitely a lot of things coming together. The other one that I think is really hasn't been represented is just gay clubs, basically. Pyramid, a lot of the ones from sort of the Lee Bowery clubs to things that Mark Moore was doing from the Mud Club, and then all these other, a lot you couldn't really hear house music anywhere else apart from Colin Faver and Eddie Richards, and who would cross over and would be playing at Pyramid, and a couple of other ones. And it was a very strong kind of coming out high energy, really. It was an Italo sort of things that crossed over into early house pretty. I mean, you didn't notice basically if they were playing a early house record, because they're the kind of same thing. They're kind of
I remember
cheap electronic records with a
I
bit of
remember
disco on them.
Harvey saying that he got his schooling in heaven. He was like, that was essentially where he learned his disco craft. And he, what was it? Some years into like house becoming, the big thing, some mid-90s at some point, he was hanging out with Patrick Forge and at a house club, and he nudged Patrick Ford and went, you used to hate high energy. We're all high energy now, you jazz twat.
Yeah.
Which is very
I always love high energy. I mean, those were the first times I used to go to Heaven in about 1984, I think, used to go, and then and we used to play at the Bell in King's Cross, which is a big it's where the big chill bar is now. That was a big A1. That was a really interesting sort of mix of kind of Jimmy Somerville and the sort of that kind of hard times at 501's, quite a neat looking thing. But I used to go there with mates because it was loads of fun, and it was very it was really underground, because unless you were in that scene, either they weren't that mixed a lot, what that one was, because that was quite trendy, but they were quite good clubs to go to, because you didn't get any. It was always a good vibe, basically. There's no trouble. There was no blokes sort of creating fights because of girls and stuff. It was always good. But say with the goth thing, Johnny from the Batcave then went on to do Nag Nag Nag. So there was a whole thing there going through Electric Clash. So it's probably playing half the same records.
It was. Electroclash is now, it's funny what embarrassment causes people to ignore in history, I feel. I mean, I've had this conversation a few times recently where it's like, I mentioned it on the Jeremy Jellett interview. It's like a lot of the very cosmic connections and thoughts that people had during that rave era. And we're not just talking clip-on dreadlock, posh, crusty ravers.
You're putting the picture in the middle of the Prodigy album, basically.
Exactly. People, that was pop culture for a good while, right in the heart of pop culture, and going right into the heart of jungle, for example. You were full of heavy weed smokers with mystical thoughts, mixing with hippies, mixing their records, playing at free parties. DJ Crust is a fine example. The whole Bristol crew were tightly connected to the Cosmic Travellers and the free parties around the countryside of England. The Circus Warp put out, essentially formed Full Cycle Records with Ronnie and Crust. You get all of these kind of connections, but everyone was having really, really out there conversations at raves and at parties, and I think in a lot of the reporting of the history of it, people don't want to remember because they're kind of almost embarrassed about what they said and did, and I think that possibly, aside from obviously the magazine articles, Electroclash in a very different way, people don't want to admit that they were out in a bin bag with lime green codpiece or whatever it was.
I'll admit my Diamante Chanel fake earrings and eyeliner being playing at Nag 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 in a posh voice, doing cover versions of Girls on Film by Duran Duran as Girls on Pills. I loved Electroclash. I love Fisher Spooner. I loved their gigs. I thought it was a great time. I love the way that their song, the chords of their song are the chords of the big Nirvana record single, Backwards. It's the same chords but backwards. Errol told me that. He said, yeah, they just put, it's like, it's not doing it, it's the other way around. But that was Emerge. So and their gigs were great as well. But
Was,
yeah, I think, I mean, Now was a phenomenal club. I mean, I remember going down.
Crazy, but it was so full on that the misbehaviour was again something people are a bit like, oh, did I do that?
I remember going down sort of quite early on. We'd done it the Droids single, and we were doing sort of very one finger sort of electronic, taking the piss records, and taking the record down to Johnny at Dag Dag Dag, and looking sort of quite normal, and everyone else looked complete, and they made me look like the weird one, basically, because everyone else had like fruit on their head or something like this. It was like I've never felt so out of place. It was kind of good. It was but really good fun night. And there's something about that place, the ghetto behind where the Astoria was there was something really, thinking about your ideas of architecture of club, it was just right, because it was a basement, which is always a plus. It was only about 200, 250. Sound system was good, bar to the left. It just had that thing, and there's something about certain club spaces that just work really well. And mine I've always favoured the basement, I think.
Oh, very much so. They were so close together. It was like, actually, the ghetto was what, 200 yards down the road from the end, not too much further, And there were so many West End clubs and dive bars, where some of the most interesting nights I had were in around that time were just someone had rented out some raddled old alcoholics bar, and I added a couple of extra speakers and just like pumped out a party.
Normally Sean McCluskey was the best one at finding those. Finding some like old sort of Swiss centre or something that looked like some kind of Tiroler hut or something, and but in the West End, because there were lots of those places. Yeah. Anyway, let's should we move from the past to the future? So do you think so this weekend we were planning all kinds of things at Sea Change, various talks, gigs, lots of weird ambience and DJing and stuff, and so now we're doing some of it, but on the internet. And what's your views of, if we don't come out of lockdown by Christmas, what are your views of how it's going to change electronic culture and dance culture?
It'll be too early to tell in 100 years. I think it's this is one of those. It's like the French Revolution. Was it Mao Zedong who said it's too early to tell about the impact of the French Revolution? I mean, this is a big one. This is historically, it's the eschaton immanentized, possibly. It's it's a massive thing, sending out ripples. But there's absolutely no way of knowing what the actual the actual butterfly effect is going to be eventually. But the intensity, and we've talked about this before, but the intensity of, some people don't care. Some people really want to switch off. Some people really want to watch Great British Menu even more. But actually, even with with junk TV, the intensity of the discourse around it, and the fact that people they're on Twitter even more, they're on their different calls and their different text conversations and their different group messages on WhatsApp even more, means that their engagement with that kind of comfort culture is even more. But I'm definitely talking to lots of people that are listening more intently and listening more closely to the records, and I've found that 1,000 times over. Whether it's, just because sometimes I'll have listening binges because of work, and so recently it's been Windy and Carl and Slayer in the same week. That was really interesting. So Windy and Carl, for anyone who doesn't know, is this couple from somewhere in Michigan who've been making like shoegaze, beyond shoegaze music for 25 odd years, like just beautiful floating guitar textures. And Slayer, obviously, a Slayer. And because I was writing about both of them, I'd like worked my way through both of their catalogues and was like, really, headphones on, right now on speakers, right now when I'm out on my bike, blah, blah, blah. And, having this incredibly intense relationship with the music.
Did you find any similarities between the two?
there's something about there's some kind of transcendental experience that comes from total immersion in both of them that maybe I don't know.
Well, that's definitely. I mean, certainly within the kind of the things we've been looking at Group Mind, and you know, you and me started doing some clubs with that in town, and you know, really realised that hearing those kind of ambient and very long form, that kind of music, hearing it really loud was a great thing. You know, it was, so that, but you know, but quite, you know, quite an acquired taste, and a lot of the things that I've been doing in terms of ambience, you know, you just think, well, this is, you know, it's a bit of a lifer's kind of job. You're going to slog away at this for, you know, 20 years just because you love it, and then, you know, maybe one or two people might know what's going on here and might appreciate it. But then since lockdown, it's just like, oh, loads more. It's just massive amount of interest in this area of music because people have got more time. You know, they can sort of see it, and it's been a very odd effect on culture. But I think you're right. The kind of, there is an intensity and a depth to listening of. But it could. I wouldn't. You know, I sort of noticed it because I'm making ambient records. But you know, it could be any music. I mean, just hearing certain pop tunes on the radio has made me really, you know, emotional. You know, that just, it sort of seems to get, it's things that get you seem to get you more at the moment.
It's, I mean, it's to do with a newness. It's to do with a general sense of like, oh my God, we're in a new situation. This is, in some sense, revolutionary. The parameters have changed, therefore my expectations have changed, therefore I'm seeing things afresh. It's partly to do with the emotional intensity of being separated from loved ones and hearing about death and disease, and it's, you know, for everyone coming closer, it's always, you know, that step of, okay, oh, it's my friend's dad, it's, you know, there's this sense of ratcheting up emotional intensity from that, which you know, as I'm always saying to Josh Posthuman from I Love Acid, every time we meet up for beers, our catchphrase is, I'd rather not live in interesting times, actually. Because it's horrible. While, but... and this was long before this, you know, this was you know, all the way through Trump and all the rest of it. It's like, you know, yes, it makes for interesting things to talk about, but I'll have a boring life compared to this. But, you know, this is where we are. And so, yeah, all of that, the newness, the sense of pressure, the sense of impending doom from God knows what's going to happen to the entire financial system and everyone's wages, and are we going to be able to cope? Are we going to step up to the mark and be mutually supportive as a society? Are we going to, you know, huge questions weighing on people. And I guess if you're engaged with culture and subculture, these are our ways, they're our kind of conduits for information, as well as being fun music and interesting to listen to. So, I mean, maybe I'm just projecting because it's my job to look at the connections between scenes and people and records and so on. But, you know, I would hope that other people are doing the same and kind of thinking, you don't want to be portentous about something that is built on the pleasure principle, or this music, you know, but at the same time, you do hope that people are just adding a layer of what's this for, who's it for, why do we do this, what's valuable about it. I definitely am having some conversations that suggest that that's the case.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that, you know, the things that have become, you know, their values have been shown. Obviously, you know, certain types of jobs and services, and the BBC and things like that. The things that you know, and radio in general, and you know, the certain things have acquired a very different, you know, between need and want. There seems to be a, you know, very different thing with you know, with certain types of jobs, and
postmen and people working in kebab shops.
Yeah.
You know, the people who will actually bring you a kebab, you know, they'll put their health at risk to bring you a kebab or a pizza, and the people who are actually bringing all the stuff you order from Amazon to your door.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, and certainly, you know, in terms of what what the arts is and what it does. I think that's, you know, I've been having I'm doing a panel on that in about a week with some very interesting people from the Old Vic and from the South Bank, and we're just looking at talking about, you know, what, you know, the nature of arts. And as you say, because we're within that's what we do. It is hard to kind of really get a good grasp on it, but there does seem to be that thing that there is you know, there is a strong sort of sense of the perceived value of the arts and culture, and that it can help. And, you know, and as, you know, something that I was looking at with Group Mind and Music for Healing was, you know, trying to, you know, I'm doing a 20-minute long piece every week, which kind of reflects the week, and also tries to do something that has got some kind of sense of stress or anxiety relief if you listen to it, if you like that kind of music, I would say, because some people it might just be like, you know, claws down a blackboard, and they'd be like, come on, what's going on, nothing's happened for 3 minutes. And so it kind of depends if you like calm music, but it's an interesting thing doing it within this time, and seeing that, you know, before I used to think about music as function, and now kind of without being too sort of pretentious about it, I really try and think of music for a purpose, and those doing this kind of music, I'm giving all the money away to Minds, the mental health charity, and it's very much, you know, there is a purpose to it, and as well, you know, I don't think that's being too pretentious, but there's also a purpose, and it's a purpose for me as well, just to actually get up and do that and make those records. You know, it's quite a hard slog making a 20-minute record track every week, as well as the 3 other albums I'm making, and you know, I haven't done this week's yet, so that's gonna have to be, might have to come out on Sunday rather than the usual Friday, but yeah, it's I think there's definite sort of it feels like somehow the spirit's changing within, or the ideas that people have got within the culture are changing. But again, you know, how much of that is are we in our own bubble, and, you know, that we're just aware of it because we work on it? It's very hard to quantify that.
I mean, you said also that you've had more direct personal feedback on the tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was you know, they were made because I was sitting in this very room with just a massive amount of madness going outside the window. There was just this crowds of people outside our house when we moved back in here, which stopped after a few months, and yeah, about 3 months it stopped, and there was various police actions and things that got the entire drug nation that was outside moved on. Not for, probably only about, you know, a few streets away or something, but yeah, it did change. But I mean, at that time, yeah, I just thought, well, I needed my own personal space to do these things, and what it really was just to help me chill out and calm down, and it was just really nice then putting them out in the world and getting people writing emails and saying, oh, this has really helped my mental health. And when I can just picture the east coast of Scotland when I'm hearing your records, and I love that place, and it really, you know, it's just an instant connection, a visual connection, and it just makes me really calm. And it's really, yeah, no one's ever really written about any of my other music to me directly saying that it actually helped their mental, you know, their states of stress and anxiety, and their overall mental health. And so that kind of idea of it being having a function and a purpose was I mean, and I kind of like think, well, you know, it wasn't hundreds of people, it was only a few people, but it was enough. I mean, one would have been enough to be like, yeah, I can keep doing this, because you know, because if you're beavering away in your little room for however many years it is, sometimes it's kind of, yeah, if you can just have someone to say, yeah, keep going, it's all right.
Well, the reason I mention that is because it does feel, and I think this is not just a in the bubble thing, but people are valuing the individual line of communication quite a bit more now, because, you know, everyone is calling their mum a bit more often. But, you know, it's like it's a common thing. People are calling their loved ones, their family, on the phone, even on the landline. I spoke to a couple of people whose landline bills have gone crazy, and they'd forgotten they even had a landline before the coronavirus. And that kind of there was something bubbling before that, with people getting frustrated with Facebook, with Twitter owning all our conversations and all our networks, and having all the data, and even controlling what our networks are, because of course, you know, we've all been on Facebook for 15 years odd now, and we've now got kind of lifelong friendships that have actually been influenced by Facebook's algorithm, which has, you know, pushed certain people more into our attention than others. And, you know, all of the scandals with Cambridge Analytica and with not, you know, this suddenly it being pushed into our faces, how unsafe our data was and how much it was being used, were making people want more direct communication and more kind of old school in some ways, but maybe not, communication. And this crisis has precipitated that. It really has. You know, I've noticed loads more personal emails, like personal email exchanges, where it might start with a work email that's has one of those sort of facile "how are you," and then someone actually says how they are, and then you're into a conversation. You know, you're into a genuine conversation. I've started my own mail out roughly once a week, where I just share stuff that's been cluttering up my hard drive mostly, but, or, you know, all the tabs on my browser, it's like things I've been reading and culture stuff that's been happening, and I just bung it out in an email, and that's given me more direct, instant, personal feedback, and started one-on-one conversations in a way that sharing on social media does, but doesn't. It's different.
Yeah. Well, also the great thing about that is that now everyone's got time to click through all those links, because it's like, you know, it's such a rich thing that you're sending over, and it's just like, well, great. Well, you know, that's my next hour sorted, which is a good thing, because, you know, because I think that it's sort of still for that real kind of bombardment by information and stuff, and this, you know, this period has been quite useful to start really looking down various rabbit holes that you probably wanted to before but didn't have time to, and I'm quite enjoying the, you know, the various live streamings and all of it, even though everyone seems to be quite bored of looking at people's front rooms. But the first time I've done one of these. I've never done one with a picture. All of the ones I've done have just been an AV show where I'm not actually on the camera. But it's, I think they're going to change. I think that there will be a better quality of live stream soon. I think I could sort of think it's a bit like the sort of first years of television, which was just like basically one camera shooting a play, basically. And there wasn't any editing. There wasn't no edits, no cut-ups, no close-ups. It's that thing, or you know, the telephone, which was a broadcasting device, one-way broadcasting device before people thought it's a communication thing. So I think it's very early days for streaming, and I've been having a lot of talks about that with people, some people at Live Nation and Ticketmaster and various things, about saying what's happening with streaming and gigs, and it's definitely early days, but there's lots of conversations going on at the moment about how to monetize this for bands, and you know, and looking at how we do gigs. I mean, it's very hard to think of, because the thing with gigs is the interaction with the audience, and that's the bit which is quite tough to crack. I've got friends who are trying to work that out for stand-up comedians, and I think that's quite difficult. If you've got no audience feedback and no noise and maybe a delay, it's like your timing's going to be fucked, isn't it? It's quite difficult.
It's Darwinian, isn't it? You know, it's evolutionary niches are created, and I mean, if it's stand-up comedy, that creates a niche for the more anecdotal and the more slightly, you know, the person who doesn't rely on the standard feedback loop of tension and punchline and tension and punchline. So, you know, we may find some incredible storytellers. We may find that you know, the new Peter Cook coming to the fore or something.
Yeah, or the new Harold Pinter or something. It's sort of the gaps in it. But it's made me really think about you know what shapes culture. Is it you know you know is it the technology or is it the art? And you know, certainly in David Byrne's book How Music Work, he really had that idea that you know the space where these things were in and the technology that we use changes things much, or things adapt to the technology rather than the other way around. So you know an opera in a grand opera house had music that fitted in that space, and you know the Ramones in CGBGs fitted in that space, and you know, and it really informed the music. And I think it's really true that you know technology does change the culture. I'm sure that you know acid house and house and techno came to the fore because you know it was a second generation of people buying Japanese Roland drum machines that were now, you know, they were, you know, quite expensive 2 years before that, and they were now in second-hand shops and were cheap, so you know, people could afford them. Same with the sampler that went from being, you know, minimum of 60 grand for a mono synclavier to which, you know, who would buy a mono synclavier? So to you know, $1,000 for an Ackline, and that sort of price drop. And then you know, I think it's sort of economics and technology are not really, you know, because it's not art. People don't think of that as the creative hub, but I think, you know, they go so hand in hand with each other that you can't really sort of say that the art kind of came first. They kind of came with those things, and I think that's what happened with streaming and online things, that you know the art will kind of forge out of the culture. I mean, you're already seeing it with TikTok and things like that. But
well, and memes, and you know, they're just people generating memes with Microsoft Paint, or well, they've discontinued Microsoft Paint now, but you know, with the very simplest image editing software, and vaporwave and all those kind of, like, you know, chill hop or whatever they call it, all these genres which only exist on YouTube that are made by people who may or may not have any musical expertise. We don't even know who they are, but they're certainly done it.
Even just in pop in general, you know, the tracks are now, you know, averaging at 2 and a bit minutes. You know, that there's one of the big ones at the moment. It's called Sneakers, and it sounds like someone put it together in about 5 minutes, and it's like terrible drum sounds, and it's really short, and you know, and also the things happen very quickly. And you know, within Spotify pop has changed that genre. You know, it's like I used to think, you know, pop song's going to be at least 3.5 minutes, but now it's like, seem to get bored after 2. They've kind of played their iPad drums, that horrible trap hi-hat, which is on everything, and it just sounds so cheap. You know, I love the
we're in the future that psychedelic visionaries saw, because this is like what the Residents were saying was going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. It's beyond the 15 minutes of fame, isn't it? But yeah, no, I've got a big. I do have a problem with trap hi-hats. They just sound really rubbish. It just sounds like no one's crafted it. They just sound like that. Having said that, I'm making a hip hop record with someone from Atlanta at the moment who wants trap beats all over their thing. So
really, you better learn to do them well. Then
I'm happy to do it.
There are so many good trap hi-hats, but yeah, it's weird. It's like it's a signature that is easy to copy. That's the problem. It's like where Timbaland or the Neptunes were hard to copy, so they didn't create a billion clones. You know, that triplet hi-hat thing, once you know what a triplet is, you can do it. And so I guess it turned into a too easy signature. I mean, it's like, you know, the way pop punk has turned, you know, the great punk into something easily replicable.
I think it's easier now because you've got, you know, the global viral top 50 on Spotify, and you can hear those tracks, and you can hear people making tracks to sound like those tracks. But I don't think it's much different to any other decade of pop. I mean, I found like now, or you know, some Club Hits '93, and it's got, you know, the kind of Euro, which I thought probably bought it because the grid was on it, and but they're all, you know, all of the other tracks that played in order on the CD, they all sound the same. They all got the same sounds, and then they got the same drum sounds. It's kind of like I don't think it's any different. I think anyone looking at any period will find those similarities. But it seems very marked with that weird triplet E hi-hat. It's like, what is that? And because I don't really know I'm being schooled in Atlanta music to hear where that came from. It's not something I know about at all, which is making it more fun.
I think we're in a phenomenal era for pop. I mean, it may be that I've got Stockholm syndrome from listening to a lot of Radio 1 in the car with the kids, but you know, I've always felt that the best eras for pop in my adult life, anyway, have been or kind of 1989 to 91, when just like there was this huge explosion and rave and indie was incredibly interesting, and you know, you had everything from the Pixies to Public Enemy in the charts, and LFO and that kind of thing. Just after the millennium, when garage was still happening, and you had the Neptunes and Timbaland and Britney and you know, incredible pop music, beginning of Destiny's Child, all that kind of thing, and now seems like one of those kind of explosive lots of things going on phases, but
certainly coming from hip hop as well, there seems to be a lot of just odd sounding records,
very weird records.
Yeah, which is great. It's like, I'm really enjoying it, because I'd kind of forgotten about, I hadn't really listened to any hip hop for ages, and then just because of doing this project, I'm just really diving in again and just finding experimental music. Really, it's fantastic.
Which again comes from drugs.
Yeah,
quite a lot.
But and samplers, I think, and but there's quite a variety from proper drug music to jazz influenced things, or all kinds. I mean, there's just there's a lot out there. That's
when it comes. Yeah, it's definitely technology, because it's partly from what began maybe 10 years ago as cloud rap, as they called it, which was people just grabbing stuff off YouTube, and like people, you would get random rap producers sampling stuff like I don't know, Boards of Canada or some weird Irish record that they'd heard, and all of that kind of like global smash and grab has begun to get into it now. We're stuck on the present now. We've done past and the present.
So what are the big pop records for you at the moment? I noticed it was the Dua Lipa album, wasn't it? The
Dua Lipa album is absolutely fantastic, and I mean, oddly, it's disco. It's a disco record more than anything. It almost sounds like something Roisin Murphy would do. It's a bit more like in your face and obvious, but I'm trying to think. It's more last year, because this year, obviously, we haven't been driving around much. But there was this like amazing set of dancehall influence things. So you had stuff like Simmer by what's her name, the Birmingham Mahalia, and you had that Strike a Pose record from Nottingham, and OT Bop, which is like a London trap record, but it sounded kind of like Murder She Wrote. It sounded like a kind of early 90s dancehall tune.
Because all those sort of like dancehall and digital things are very minimal anyway, aren't they? But they've got that. There's a kind of Latin snare beat in there as well. So there is a similarity there, definitely.
Completely, and I mean that again takes us back into this generational thing where actually a lot of bass music in this country comes from a lack of generation gap, from people going to parties where family parties, barbecues, house parties, where the DJ still plays Murder She Wrote.
Carnival every year, I would have thought, certain records that
Sister Nancy,
Yeah, I mean, like No by Dawn Penn, I've heard in so many different situations. I mean, over many years. It's always. I've never not heard it at Notting Hill Carnival. It's always,
and even if you're as white as hell and don't go to Notting Hill Carnival or anything, Uptown Top Ranking is still in your mental like makeup. It's part of our history. So it will always those licks, those particular stylistic things will always be in our, you know, if someone uses them again, it will hit that familiarity button, even for someone living down where I do in Gammon Town on the south coast. But yeah, let's talk about the future a little bit, because we've kind of talked about how these threads kind of come up to this this extremely indeterminate present that we're in. But you know, part of what you were going to do at the festival is Journey to Utopia, and that is about the future.
But it was about trying to think of the future in a way that isn't dystopian, was the thing, because it's, you know, every story that you see in you know, sci-fi and in, you know, big Hollywood movies, there's a very, seemed to me, of a very sort of easy kind of way of looking at the future as this kind of post-apocalyptic, you know, rubble-strewn place, and everything was going horribly wrong, and I just sort of, you know, I think it's kind of harder and more challenging to look at positive futures and look at ways that those can come about, or, you know, obviously, you know, looking at the way that the news is, that you know, it's very skewed towards stories with negative stories, that to get more people to read them, you know, that it doesn't necessarily, you know, even though we are living, you know, quite close to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, whether there is, you know, a way out that isn't such doom mongering, and you know, which obviously people could say was, you know, one sense that could appear very naive, but in another way, you actually, you know, it's actually necessary, because people need goals to survive, and I was reading a book about concentration camps, and saying that it said very much that if people didn't have a goal or a hope, they would die a lot sooner, and it's almost a physical, it's a thing within us that you know, you need an aim and you need a goal. So I think that if the aim and the goal is dystopian, then it's very easy for that to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
the book again, which book again? Which book?
Oh man, it's called. I'll find it. It's probably in this room somewhere. It's really good. It's called. I can't remember what it's called.
Oh, is it? If This Is a Man?
It's got a man. It's got a man in the title, and it's by someone like Joseph something or other. I'll come back to you on it. But it's. I think it's called Man's. Is it called Man's Search for Meaning? I can't remember something. I don't know. But it's basically about this. Psychologist in concentration camps, and what I think it's called Man's Search for Meaning. Actually, that's what it's called. I'll look it up while we're here. And but it's a great book, and it was just sort of saying, you know, even within the very, very darkest days, the things that got them through was hope. And but it's quite interesting just reading that just before we just hit this apocalyptic lifestyle, and thinking, yeah, it's not as bad as that. Let me look it up. I'm sure it's called Man's Search for Meaning Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. There you go. It's a classic.
Okay, because I was thinking of Primo Levi, which, you know, touches on a lot of those similar themes within the concentration camp context. So.
Yeah. So you know, there is, you know, I was talking to someone else today earlier about the 20s, saying, you know, it was such an incredible period of artistic creativity, but it was coming straight after the war and the you know, the so-called Spanish flu. You know, you know, there has to be reactions to hardship that can create beauty, or you know, or encourage beauty and art to happen. I think it's so that's the day with Journey to Utopia was that, and sort of a year, you know, we've basically done a load of things at the Cockpit Theatre in London, and we did Lunar Festival and various other talks and things, and you know, I was kind of thinking of it as not something that's necessary. It's just a good headspace and a good kind of intellectual thing to be looking at. But as soon as this hit, it's like, well, no, we really need to do this. It's like we do need to find a path out and to think of paths out and to the new future, because it's not going to be the same as it was before. So it's really weird. So the two things that I've been looking at lately, which seem to be really fringe, which is sort of ambient music and positivity in the future have now become kind of necessary.
It's suddenly when you mention early 20th century and the revolutions that were happening, the creative revolutions that were happening, it's easy to say that culture is just an escape from or a reaction against what's happening, but actually I mean if you look at jazz, I think Underground Resistance or Theo Parrish would have talked about music as a technology, and jazz was creating a toolkit. It was creating a technology, a musical technology, a language which could be utilized. And you can see all of the elements that were being built in New Orleans being passed right down through Black American and mixed American culture to create some of the better things that have been created in the century since. And you can kind of say the same about modernism in literature and visual arts as well. It was a toolkit. It was a technological response, and things were being created. So it may be that this kind of forced period of reflection that we have now will enable someone somewhere to build some really interesting kind of cultural survival toolkits.
I think there's definitely hope for it, and just by speaking to anyone that I know who is involved in any of the creative arts, they're all doing stuff. They're all massively busy, and not even if it's some of it's massively busy with work, with paid work, and some of it's massively busy researching, experimenting and looking at things, but they're all I haven't come across many people who have just gone, well, let's have a big holiday. So I think most of the people within arts are finding it obviously massively challenging, but are looking at new ways to do things.
Yeah, well, I hope that...
Well, I'm an eternal optimist, so but I think yes, I hope my optimism isn't too naive, but you never know.
Well, if it's not, if it is naive, then we blow up anyway. So
yeah, I'd rather be an optimist, and it gives you more choice, really. If there's with pessimism, you've only really got one end thing, which is, well, that was shit, I told you so. Whereas optimism's got, you've got lots of different routes that you can try.
I watched a very, very nihilistic Russian film this week called "Why Don't You Just Die?"
Right.
And there is something to be said for the Russian sense of humour, which is just it's all bad, you're gonna die.
That's true. There's probably a regional take, isn't it?
We all respond in our own ways, but I mean, who knows if it's just privilege, or if it feels like there are a lot of good things going on now.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting things, and I can't exactly say I'm enjoying it because I'm an anxiety-prone individual. But
it's kind of up and down, isn't it? Really?
There is hope. There genuinely is hope. There are ideas being connected. There are people doing things in interesting ways that haven't been done before, and that's worth hanging on to. Yeah,
including this weekend of Sea Change. So we're looking forward to checking it out. I haven't seen the full lineup yet, but I know there's lots of things going on. So.
Yeah, and the conversations have already started. It's funny. It's like, once there's a hashtag, the festival's begun.
Right.
It kind of feels like people setting up their tents around the hashtag already.
So it's got its own space out there, the virtual space that's different from the four walls. But
well, here's to a good weekend anyway, and
indeed, yeah.
And then well, here's to it happening in the flesh.
Yeah, no, that was, it was a real shame because there was so much good stuff going to go on there. But I mean, I think most of the people that we talked to for our bit, pretty much everyone and everyone I know from the other artists was saying that they would, basically, it could be basically the same lineup next year because everyone said yes, basically. So that'd be good.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I mean, and all the stuff we've been talking about, all those kind of lines of history connection leading up to the present moment, it was well represented with the things that were going to be happening. Right? Everyone from Penny Rambo to Sports Banger.
Yeah, completely good mixture. Great. Well, I'd love to speak to you and have a good Sea Change weekend, and we'll get to play loud ambient music in the field soon, hopefully.
Yeah, nice. Right, onwards into the future.
See you later. Bye.
All right.